At 24, with no home to call her own and down to her last $50, Julia inherited a ruined, overgrown 1908 country schoolhouse that everyone else called worthless. Her brothers claimed the fertile valley acres, dividing the rich soil and heavy machinery greedily among themselves. They laughed as they drove away, leaving their young sister with nothing but a drafty, abandoned wooden shell. Standing in the rising dust of their departure, she realized she was now entirely on her own in the cold world. With only a single worn suitcase and a rolled sleeping bag, she began the long, lonely walk toward the town's edge. Through the thinning autumn woods, the weathered gray silhouette of the old schoolhouse finally appeared to her. Briars and wild vines choked the path, as if nature itself had tried to reclaim the forgotten structure over time. Built in the autumn of 1908, the schoolhouse stood as a silent monument to a bygone era of rural Virginia life. The roof sagged under the weight of decades, and the empty belfry held a heavy bell that had not rung in years. Her boots creaked softly on the rotting porch steps, each sound echoing in the quiet, golden country afternoon. Pushing open the heavy oak door, she was greeted by the scent of old paper, dry rot, and forgotten winter cold. Golden shafts of sunlight pierced the dusty air, illuminating a space frozen in the early years of the century. Rows of small wooden desks sat in silent rows, waiting forever for children who had long since grown and left. On the front blackboard, faint chalk marks from a final lesson still lingered like quiet ghosts of a lost era. She set her meager belongings down on the dusty floorboards, the sound breaking the room's deep, heavy silence. Looking upward, she saw where the plaster had crumbled, exposing the hand-hewn lath and the cold sky far above. She walked to the tall windows, wiping away a thick layer of grime to let the fading autumn sunlight pour inside. Across the distant hills, her brother's fields lay rich and harvested, serving as a painful reminder of her own bitter loss. Upon the teacher's desk lay a forgotten attendance book, its old leather cover cracked and covered in a heavy layer of dust. Opening the fragile pages, she read the names of children who had once filled this quiet room with their life. A sudden gust of wind rattled the loose glass panes, sending a cold shiver through the drafty old schoolhouse. She pulled her woolen coat tightly around her shoulders, feeling the true isolation of this new, ruined house. In a dark corner, she discovered a stack of old textbooks, their pages chewed by generations of wild field mice. The silence here was absolute, a heavy weight that seemed to press down on her anxious, tired, and lonely heart. Looking up, she noticed the frayed hemp rope hanging from the ceiling, connected to the silent bell far above. She reached out and gently touched the rough fibers, wondering when the heavy bell had last called the community together here. This school had once been the beating heart of the valley, built by neighbors who cared for one another's kids. She remembered her grandfather speaking of the old days when education was a true treasure worth sacrificing everything for here. The painful memory of her brother's cruel laughter slowly faded, replaced by a quiet determination to survive in this lonely place. She realized that although she had been cast out, she now possessed a quiet space that was entirely her own to build and shape. Finding an old broom in the closet, she began to sweep away the dust of decades from the pine floorboards now. She carefully unrolled her sleeping bag near the hearth, preparing for her first night in the schoolhouse room. The cast-iron stove was cold and rusted, filled with the cold ashes of fires that had died out long decades ago. Stepping back outside, she gathered dry twigs and fallen oak leaves from the overgrown schoolyard grounds now. The setting sun cast long amber shadows across the clearing, painting the old wood in warm, golden light now. She returned inside as the twilight deepened, watching the corners of the classroom slowly fade into the dark shadows of night. Kneeling by the stove, she struck a match, the tiny flame illuminating her face in the darkening schoolroom now. The dry kindling caught quickly, sending a gentle warmth and a soft orange glow across the old floorboards now. Sitting close to the fire, she watched the flames dance, feeling the first sense of comfort in many long days. As night fell over the Virginia hills, the forgotten schoolhouse held a single spark of life once more inside. As the first light of morning broke over the Virginia hills, the cold shadows of the old schoolhouse began to fade. The rising morning sun revealed decades of neglect, casting a quiet, soft glow over the thick dust that covered every surface. In the far corner, resting against the damp wall, she found a worn broom made of dried straw and weathered pine from the forest. With steady, deliberate strokes, she began to sweep the dusty floorboards, waking the quiet room from its long, deep slumber. Thick clouds of dust swirled in the cool morning air, catching the early light like tiny floating specks of shimmering gold. Dried oak leaves, carried inside by years of harsh winter winds, were now swept gently toward the open doorway of the school. High in the dusty corners of the ceiling, she cleared away the thick cobwebs that had held the dark shadows for such a long time. She paused before the large slate chalkboard, where faint traces of lessons from a century ago still lingered. With a soft cloth, she carefully wiped away the grime, revealing the deep black slate that had once held so many young dreams. Next, she gathered a heavy wooden bucket and a clean rag, determined to let the warm autumn light fully enter the dusty room. Outside, the old iron well pump creaked loudly in the quiet air as she drew cold, clear water from the depths of the earth. Carrying the heavy bucket back inside, she felt the immense weight of the task ahead, yet her resolve did not waver for a moment. She pressed the wet cloth against the glass, scrubbing away the thick layers of dark dirt left by years of harsh winter storms. Slowly, the dark grime dissolved, revealing the beautiful, wavy texture of the old, hand-blown glass of the schoolhouse window. A brilliant beam of golden autumn sunlight pierced the clean glass, cutting through the heavy dimness of the old schoolroom. She washed the next pane, watching the vibrant orange colors of the surrounding Virginia woods slowly come into sharp focus. Warm light flooded the room, spilling across the rows of antique oak desks that sat in silent, dusty alignment. The rich grain of the old oak floor began to glow, warmed by the autumn sun for the first time in over 50 long, quiet years. She gently wiped the dust from a small student desk, imagining the voices of the children who once sat there so very long ago. In the corner of the wooden desk, a small glass inkwell remained, serving as a quiet relic of a long-forgotten time in history. Down on the distant dirt road, a horse-drawn wagon slowed down, its driver staring up curiously at the old, abandoned schoolhouse. The local townspeople watched her from afar, whispering to one another that she would surely abandon the ruin within a few days. Though she felt their skeptical eyes upon her, she simply turned back to her physical work with a quiet, steady determination. She inspected the wooden walls, finding several large gaps where the cold autumn wind could easily slip inside. From her small canvas bag, she pulled out a rusted hammer and a handful of old, bent iron nails that she had carefully salvaged. She carefully aligned a loose pine board, preparing to secure it tightly against the weathered frame of the old school building. The sharp sound of her hammer echoed through the quiet valley, creating a steady rhythm of rebirth and repair. With each nail driven home, the old structure grew stronger, resisting the slow decay that had threatened it for so many years. On the high ridge, a local farmer stopped his plow, watching the smoke rise from the chimney with a look of deep disbelief. They expected the harsh mountain weather to break her spirit, waiting for her to pack up her few things and leave the valley. Ignoring the doubts of the valley people, she swept the last pile of dirt and dry leaves out over the worn wooden threshold. The clean threshold now stood wide open, welcoming the crisp, sweet scent of the Virginia autumn woods inside. Exhausted but satisfied, she sat down on one of the clean oak benches, letting her tired muscles finally relax. Her hands were calloused and covered in dark soot, bearing the honest, proud marks of a hard day's physical labor in the school. The old schoolhouse no longer felt abandoned. It felt like a warm place waiting for the voices of children to finally return. Golden sunlight bathed the entire classroom, turning the simple wooden room into a quiet, peaceful sanctuary of warmth and comfort. A gentle breeze drifted softly through the clean glass windows, carrying the rustle of falling autumn leaves into the quiet room. She looked thoughtfully at the clean slate chalkboard, ready to write a brand new chapter for this long-forgotten mountain school. The gentle shadows of the oak trees danced softly across the clean wooden floorboards, painting intricate patterns of golden light. Standing quietly by the open door, she looked out at the vast valley, ready to face whatever difficult challenges tomorrow brought. The bright morning sun painted the old schoolhouse in warm shades of amber, calling her back to the important work left unfinished. A cool autumn breeze whispered through the open door, carrying the rich scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. She gently set her wooden toolbox near the front platform, where generations of dedicated teachers had once stood to instruct. Tiny dust motes danced silently in the golden shafts of sunlight, illuminating the quiet, forgotten history of the empty room. For many decades, these old floorboards had held the weight of children's footsteps, now worn completely smooth by passing time. Kneeling carefully near the teacher's desk, she ran her fingers over the rough oak planks, searching closely for any weak spots. The old wood was cold beneath her touch, carrying the deep chill of many winters spent in this lonely, isolated mountain valley. As she shifted her weight near the front platform, a sharp, hollow groan echoed loudly from the old floorboards beneath her feet. It was a sound entirely different from the usual creaks, suggesting an empty space hidden deep within the building's foundation. She pressed down firmly on a wide pine board, watching it slowly yield under the steady, heavy pressure of her strong right hand. With careful, observant eyes, she examined the rusted square nails that had held the wood firmly in place for over a century. She reached deep into her canvas bag for the iron crowbar, its heavy weight feeling familiar and reassuring in her steady grip. Carefully positioning the tool in the narrow gap, she prepared to disturb a deep silence that had lasted for many generations. The old iron tool pried against the ancient oak, making a sharp, loud protest that echoed through the quiet, empty classroom. With a slow, steady pull, the stubborn old nails began to yield, releasing their tight grip on the dark wooden joists below. As the board slowly lifted, a musty scent of old earth and dry rot rose from the darkness, filling the cool air of the room. She carefully set the heavy board aside, revealing a narrow, deeply shadowed cavity hidden between the structural beams. Peering closely into the dim opening, she squinted against the shadows, waiting patiently for her eyes to adjust to the dark. Resting quietly on the dry dirt floor below was a rectangular shape, half buried under a thick layer of ancient gray dust. She slowly reached her hand deep into the narrow opening, her fingers brushing against a cold, heavily rusted metallic surface. With careful, deliberate effort, she lifted the heavy object out of its resting place and into the warm, golden autumn light. It was a weathered, rusted tin box, its metal surface deeply scarred by time and sealed shut by decades of accumulated dust. She placed the heavy tin container gently on the dusty floorboards, her heart beating much faster in the quiet, empty room. With trembling fingers, she carefully wiped away the thick grime, revealing the faint, pressed patterns on the metal lid. The rusted latch resisted her efforts at first, but with a firm, steady push, it gave way with a sharp, loud metallic click. As she slowly lifted the lid, the distinct scent of aged paper and preserved leather drifted up from the open tin container. Resting directly on top was a thick stack of old letters, carefully bundled together with a piece of faded, dusty twine. Beneath the letters lay a small, leather-bound diary, its cover worn completely smooth by hands that had long since passed. Right beside the book sat two heavy glass mason jars, filled to the brim with old copper pennies and tarnished silver coins. The old coins caught the bright sunlight, casting dull reflections of gold and silver across the worn wooden floorboards. She gently lifted the bundle of letters, feeling the fragile, dry paper that held the long-forgotten secrets of the past. The ink on the old envelopes had faded to a soft brown, bearing postmarks from historic towns that no longer existed today. She carefully set the old letters aside and picked up the leather diary, its spine embossed with the year 1908. Opening the worn cover, she found elegant, flowing handwriting that detailed the daily struggles of the historic school. The teacher's written words spoke of a harsh winter and of a community determined to keep this sanctuary open for all. As she carefully turned the fragile pages, a familiar family name appeared, written in bold, determined strokes of ink. It was her own great-grandfather, who had quietly funded the school in order to protect the valley's vulnerable children. The diary revealed a secret plan to preserve the land, ensuring this historic place would always remain a safe refuge. She realized the gold coins were a hidden reserve, left behind to rebuild the school when the right time finally arrived. Clutching the diary to her chest, she looked out the window, knowing her work here was part of a lasting family legacy. As dawn broke over the Virginia hills, the old schoolhouse stood silent, cradling the secrets of a forgotten era. Inside, sat quietly by the window, holding the fragile diary that linked her family to this sacred ground. The gold coins lay on the dusty oak desk, catching the first rays of sunlight like embers from a long-dead fire. She knew these relics were more than mere treasure. They were the key to saving the valley's oldest sanctuary. With a resolute heart, she penned a letter to the State Preservation Society, hoping they would hear her plea. Days passed like slow-moving water, the autumn leaves turning deep shades of amber and rust outside the window. Then, a black carriage arrived, carrying 3 distinguished scholars whose lives were dedicated to preserving the past. They stepped onto the creaking porch, their faces filled with curiosity as they looked at the weathered facade. Opened the heavy wooden door, welcoming the visitors into the dusty, sunlit classroom of her ancestors. The lead historian, a man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked around the room with quiet reverence. They gathered around the central oak desk, where the historic diary and the ancient gold coins had been carefully arranged. With gloved hands, the archivist gently opened the diary, her fingers tracing the elegant, faded handwriting on the page. A deep silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft rustle of paper and the distant, sweet call of a meadowlark. The scholars carefully examined the ink, noting the specific formula used in the late 19th century to sign names. Watched their faces, searching for any sign of hope that her great-grandfather's legacy would be saved. The numismatist picked up a gold coin, weighing it carefully before examining its unique mint mark under the bright light. "These gold coins," he whispered, "were minted during a time of great struggle, intended specifically to fund local education." The diary confirmed the transaction, detailing how the family wealth was hidden to protect the school's future. The lead historian looked up, his eyes shining with the excitement of a researcher who had found lost history. "This archive is finally complete," he declared, proving beyond any doubt the historical significance of this old schoolhouse. The threat of demolition vanished like morning fog, replaced by the beautiful promise of preservation and historic renewal. News of the discovery spread quickly through the valley, stirring a deep sense of pride among all of the local families. Soon, many volunteers arrived at the schoolhouse, eager to help restore the historic building to its former, rustic glory. Carpenters worked on the sagging porch, replacing rotten pine with sturdy oak that would last for generations. Stood in the yard, watching the community come together to rebuild the place her family had protected. Inside, the dusty chalkboards were wiped clean, revealing the dark slate that had once held the daily school lessons of old. The old oak desks were carefully polished with beeswax, bringing out the rich, warm grain of the historic wood once again. The State Historical Society officially designated the old schoolhouse as a protected historic landmark of the entire valley. A grand dedication ceremony was planned, inviting everyone in the community to celebrate the rebirth of their shared heritage. On the day of the ceremony, the old schoolhouse stood proud, its windows sparkling and its historic bell ready to ring. The large crowd gathered on the lawn, their faces filled with joy as they looked upon the saved piece of local history. The preservation director stepped forward, announcing that the schoolhouse would now serve as a living museum. He turned to Lattery, presenting her with the heavy key and naming her the official custodian of the historic landmark. As she held the heavy iron key in her hand, felt a deep connection to the generations that had walked before her. She had finally found her own place to stand, keeping the bright flame of her family's legacy alive for the generations to come. The old school bell rang out once more, its clear voice echoing across the entire valley, calling the local children home. The once forgotten schoolhouse was forgotten no longer, standing as a proud beacon of hope and heritage for all future generations. If you felt the warmth of this forgotten story, please subscribe to join us as we travel along these quiet roads of history. Please like this video to help us preserve these tales, and share your own family heritage in the comments section below. Thank you so much for wandering with us today, and may your own family heritage guide you on the quiet roads that lie ahead.